Hi, folks. Welcome to the August 2025 webinar. I just wanted to mention that this is the seventh time that that name Aaron, has been used for the Atlantic Basin. The Atlantic Basin has 6 different annual lists for tropical cyclones. This process started in 1979, and Aaron was first included for the 1983 list. But that year, there wasn't a need to use the name. So the first time Aaron became a named event was in 1989. I'm sure you know that after a committee meeting, certain names can be removed if they were significant that year. Let me go back here so we can see. There we go. So certain names can be removed if that year's events were significant. So while Hurricane Aaron this year has brought storm surge along the coast, it's following that standard C section that you might be familiar with when we're looking at how the hurricane makes that movement in the Atlantic Basin. Hopefully everyone stays safe. So now let's go ahead and get started with what we need to talk about for the state. I'm sure everyone wants to get to these stats. July was tied as the 24th hottest July on record, and these rankings go back to 1895. Pinal County had their 12th hottest July, and Pima County had their 11th hottest July. Phoenix ended with their 9th hottest July on record. Then looking statistically, July is the second wettest month for Arizona, but unfortunately, you can see that July was dry across most of the state for that month. It ended as the 14th driest July statewide. Greenlee County, the central eastern part of the state, they did the best for July precipitation, kind of tapping into the monsoonal flow that mostly stayed in New Mexico so far. Phoenix, Flagstaff, and Tucson were all below average July precipitation. Then looking here, this is the last 12 months. So the map is showing the average temperature rankings from August 2024 to July 2025. So adding all of those months together overall, statewide, this was the third hottest August to July on record. Popping over to the charts, you'll see the statewide rankings for each month. The reds that we still see there, September, October, December, those were the record hottest for the state. Now, looking at the same 12 months, so August 2024 to July 2025, but it's looking at precipitation rankings. Statewide, the last 12 months ranked as the third driest August to July on record. Looking at the charts, if you put together December and January records, that was the driest December to January on record for the state, which unfortunately those are the two statistically wettest months for winter months for the state. Then we see the green colors for this past May and June on that chart. May and June are statistically the driest months for Arizona. So even though they ranked as wetter, they still didn't provide a good amount of precipitation. And then July landed as a very dry July. So let's head over to our water year records. Remember that a water year runs from October to September, and that's the calendar used to manage water in the United States and Canada. After a very dry start to the water year, and then followed with an exceptionally dry winter, and now a very dry July, Arizona is sitting with its fifth driest October to July on record. And that's only giving us 48% of long-term precipitation to date. The map that you're seeing shows rankings for precipitation from October to July at different weather stations. And most gauges that you're looking at there are measuring somewhere in their top 10 driest water years to date. The two statistically driest months of the year, May and June, like we mentioned, those were the only 2 months so far this water year that had above average statewide precipitation. So now we're looking at short-term drought maps for the last couple of Augusts and also the current short-term drought map. That's kind of what we're kind of getting a sense as to what's been going on in the state. So if you go back to the August 2023 short-term drought map, that time was coming out of a very wet winter in 2023, and it was followed by a dry summer. So you can see how that moderate short-term drought expanded in central and southeastern Arizona in August 2023. And then a similar thing happened for August 2024, looking at that map kind of in the middle of our maps here. It's the same kind of thing. There was a slightly wetter winter 2024, and if you pop into kind of Pima County, you can see last August, they had an okay start for summer. The current short-term drought map, you definitely have seen degradation, and we have just seen some additional degradation recently where severe short-term drought expanded in Apache County. So let's take a look at how the monsoon is doing so far. First, take a look at that animation. So those are the last 10 monsoon seasons. And to give you a sense, was it wet or was it dry? So you can see that some of these seasons were wetter. That's where you see all that green and the lighter colors. Some were dry. That's where you see all the brown colors. 2022 was the sixth wettest summer for Arizona. And 2020 was the driest summer for Arizona. So then take a look at these charts. You can see that we're looking at various different individuals in counties and states. And Winslow is the only city on these charts that's above average precipitation for the monsoon so far. There's another way to assess the monsoon to date. So it's looking at lightning strikes statewide. So that's what you're seeing at the top of the chart. And you can see that thunderstorm activity has been well below average for the state. You can also look at things like measurable precipitation. What that means is when we're measuring the precipitation, there's at least 1/100th of an inch of precipitation in the gauge. Phoenix so far has only had one day with measurable precipitation this monsoon. And, kind of understanding what they normally have on average, not every year, but on average, looking at that longer term average, Phoenix tends to have 10 to 12 thunderstorm days that have measurable precipitation. If you want to look at what Flagstaff and Tucson have been doing so far this monsoon, Flagstaff has had 16 days so far with measurable precipitation. Tucson has had 8 days so far with measurable precipitation for the monsoon. And then if we look at this map, this is where we're kind of looking at to date. So the monsoon precipitation, is it dry? Is it wet? When you see the greens or the lighter colors on this map, those locations are either average amounts or maybe slightly wetter so far for the monsoon. So it really hasn't spread across the state. And then looking at what may happen. So we never want to cut things out. We have the full monsoon season that we have to get through. It doesn't end until the end of September. So looking at this, not so bad. So for the end of August, the CPC is giving us a more active end of the month and a start to September. We always appreciate that. And one of those things that's going on is we're seeing that classic monsoon setup happening for Arizona. When we're looking at this, it can bring, looking at that H where we're seeing it set up over the four corners, it can bring moisture into Arizona. Winds move in a clockwise manner around that high pressure system. And keep your fingers crossed, but hopefully we can get some precipitation. The expectation, though, is that it might happen in a very short period of time, so that can build flash flooding in Arizona. So please pay attention, keep folks safe. And then we're looking here at what may happen for September. The CPC has given Arizona mostly warmer and dry conditions. Not a good way that we want to end the monsoon season or the water year, but we'll have to wait and see what ends up happening. And then it's now time to start keeping our eyes on the equatorial Pacific sea surface temperatures. That's what you're looking at with that map right now. Right now, it looks like mostly ENSO neutral conditions are expected this fall. And what may happen, a possible slight turn into La Nina for winter, we'll have to wait and see. La Nina for winter is statistically drier for Arizona, but again, we'll have to keep our eyes on it. And now I'd like to introduce Hannah. Hannah, good to have you here. We're really grateful to have you here. You're going to have a great talk here, folks. Hannah was born and raised in Arizona, and she serves the state doing something she loves. That's at the flood control district. So I'm going to stop share and let Hannah come on in now. Thanks. All right. Looks like things are getting ready on your side, Hannah.
Yes, I
And
apologize, getting my audio in there.
I know.
But thank you for that introduction. Really appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very honored to talk at this climate webinar about myself, about flood control, and really just what it takes to work at flood control, how I got here, and where I'll be going. So we'll just get right into it. I want to talk for a quick second, and I promise I'll make it quick because I've got more fun stuff to talk about my background and myself. So I was born and raised in Arizona, like Dr. Sappel mentioned, northern Arizona, but I'm very familiar with the monsoon season with those afternoon, evening storms. And it was really just curiosity that kind of drew me to the meteorological world. So understanding where these storms are coming from and how in the world a single person could predict that that was happening just kind of blew my mind when I was younger. And the field itself really fit with my vision and where I wanted to be. I loved math, I loved science, and kind of how that ties into the more humanities and being a communicator and in being a public servant. So from there, that took me to Arizona State University, where I started in 2020 and graduated in May of 2024 with a bachelor's of science in geography with an emphasis in meteorology and climatology. I also have a certificate of atmospheric science, and I minored in sustainability. I could go on and on about my degree and about the classes I took and the things that I learned, but really the most important thing I think I did during my 4 years there, and really what I wish I had done more of, was getting involved with student involvement. So that started in 2021. 2020 was COVID, so I was mostly interacting with my laptop screen. So once we started to get back going into in person, I joined the Weather and Climate Club, did all kinds of things with them. I spent a lot of time volunteering for the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. So they had all kinds of events teaching people from kids to students to their parents and grandparents about weather, about geography, about urban planning, about the school there, about what it is that they do. Along with that, I was certified in 2022 as a National Weather Service Skywarn spotter. I've been a member of the American Meteorological Society since 2022 as well. And I didn't get it on this slide, but to add to that, I volunteered and took weather observations for the State Climate Co-op station at the ASU campus. And if you were to take this slide right here and the slide previous about my education, that right there was what my resume looked like before I ever stepped foot onto flood control district. And so it just kind of goes to show that really what matters is getting involved. Obviously, that degree is important, but people want to see that you're involved, that you're meeting people, that you're knowing your stuff and you're practicing it and you're getting out and doing it in the real world. So what do I do at Flood Control District of Maricopa County? I started in June of 2024 as an intern in the flood warning branch. Did that until February of this year, after which I was hired full time as an engineer associate. Now, that term, you've probably seen it. It's broad. It can really mean a lot of things. It essentially means I do engineer related tasks, but I'm not actually a professional engineer. It allows me to really be a meteorologist at heart, which is what I do in my position. So I mentioned before I was a flood warning branch intern, and in that flood warning branch, we work under the engineering division here at Flood Control, and we run a year-round flood warning program. So just a quick overview on that. What that includes is watching the weather, issuing daily outlooks, and then when it starts raining, we're monitoring our alert system. We're monitoring the rain that's falling, if streams are flowing, if there's water. And from there, we're taking action, sending out messages to emergency responders so that they can do what needs to be done to protect the people, whether that's closing roads as much as, issuing evacuations, so on and so forth. So I specifically work with the meteorological services program. To start, when it's clear skies, no rain, we're still keeping an eye. We always have an eye on the network and on the skies. We have three meteorologists, including myself, in our team. We issue daily weather outlooks that are available for the public. They're geared towards those emergency responders, but they're available for anyone to read. And then when it starts raining, that's when things start to get serious. So we're issuing messages to those responders so that they know what to do. They have a heads up. And then when the rain is falling and the streams start flowing, we're keeping an eye on streams, where the water's going, if there's any risks to people, to life, to property. And then it can get as serious as internal alerts where we need to bring in dam safety experts, levee experts. We need to bring in public communication. Maybe we need to talk to emergency managers, things like that. And so it can ramp up pretty quick. And there's a lot to do as a meteorologist. And then when it stops raining, when the rainbow comes out, still a big part of it. So every monsoon season, we do forecast verification. That includes gathering together all of our forecasts and comparing it against what happened. So pulling all kinds of rainfall data based on locations and things like that. Doing storm reports after any kind of severe event. We do reports for the water year across our alert network with all of our rain gauges and weather stations, things like that. Another big part of that is planning ahead. So we manage 14 flood response plans across Maricopa County. And what these are, you can see it on that flow chart on the right. And you don't have to read that all. I'll just kind of line it out for you. Is the first step is the alert protocol. So understanding what it takes to start acting. You have a green alert, you have a red alert, you can have a blue alert, and which departments are responsible for what. So this lays that all out so that when it does start raining and when, things become hazardous, no one has any question about what it is they need to do. And this includes a lot of understanding the geography of, the areas within those jurisdictions. So understanding the watershed itself, understanding the streams, which direction they flow, as well as, are there critical facilities that are in the floodplain? Are there homes that are in the floodplain? How much time do we have before water reaches from point A to point B? Is there going to be loss of access? Which roads flood? And so much more. So it's a really big endeavor, but it's a really important proactive response rather than a reactive. So another job that I had as an intern, and I probably still have right now as a full-time, is to learn. Biggest thing was just being a sponge and soaking up what I could. And these are a couple of courses that I took while I was at Flood Control that I probably could have easily taken beforehand, and been, maybe a step ahead of the game. So MetEd offers free registration, and they have all kinds of meteorology courses. So starting from beginner to intermediate to advanced. And those two specifically, the SCUT and the radar signatures, really helped me a lot on becoming a better forecaster and a better nowcaster. So for anyone, interested maybe in a similar position to me, or later in your school years, that would really be a good option to take a look at those. And same with Esri courses. So GIS is a big part of what I do with those flood response plans. And if as long as nothing's changed, I believe all ASU students should have access to Esri courses. So if that applies to you, I'd really invite you to look into it. If interested, you can take classes on ArcGIS Pro, on ArcGIS Online. I currently am taking classes on Web Experience Builder, trying to grow my knowledge and know more. And then Code Academy is a little less accessible. They charge you a monthly subscription, but I've taken that Learn Python class. I use it all the time. When I started, I kind of knew how to code, but wasn't really applying it very well. And now I've done some pretty cool things with our rainfall data using that Python code. So I'd really invite if anyone's interested in just learning a little bit more outside of your own degree that would be applicable to a real world situation. These are good places to start. And then another thing I do is I get out and show off. A big part of my job is being a familiar face, and on top of that, being a reliable face. I'm doing forecasts and I'm talking to all kinds of people, and knowing names and them knowing me is essential. So I've got the opportunity to go out into the field to go to some pretty fun remote locations. I've taken some boat rides to alert stations, and I've climbed 2 hours up a mountain to get to another, which is a really, really fun experience. And education is a big part of it too. So I got the opportunity to talk to our field crews about monsoon safety, as well as maybe doing parts in Monsoon Outlook. And then I also get to spend a little bit of time embarrassing myself on social media. So if you're on Instagram, X, Facebook, even following Maricopa Flood, you've probably seen my name, here and there. And then I want to just take a little bit of time to maybe do some reflection and maybe some advice for any young professionals out there, and especially for any students that are watching on things maybe I wish I knew a year ago. I'm really, really grateful to be at Flood Control District right now. I love my job and I love the things that I've learned. And so I think it would have been nice to know these things maybe a year or two ago. But the first thing is that I'm going to feel miles outside of my comfort zone. First year, I was very stressed out all the time and just overwhelmed with the sheer amount of knowledge that I was learning about meteorology, emergency management, hydrology, etc. And as stressful and overwhelming as that was, I know that it was good for me. And it's really just an easy way to elevate what it is that you already know. There's a quote that probably goes a little more eloquently than I'm about to say it, but it's that if you're always the smartest guy in the room, then you're hanging out in the wrong rooms. And I think that that applies to this. To go along with that, when you have this just excess of knowledge, taking notes, writing things down, and asking questions is a big part of it. I've had multiple times where I didn't write something down and you forget it and you got to just, come back to it and try and learn it again. And so when you're trying to learn setting yourself up for success and taking notes and remembering and going back to things, I know it makes work feel like school, but I promise you it helps. And on the flip side of that, I'm still learning. I was learning, but there's no discounting the work you've already put in and the things that you've already learned. So trusting yourself is number one. You have to be able to trust what you know. You have to be able to communicate it, stand by it, things like that. And then this is probably advice I wish I knew maybe 4 or 5 years ago, more so than one, when I started my degree. But meteorologists are not just meteorologists. You can be, but the last thing you ever want to do is limit yourself. And so I myself am a meteorologist, but I dabble in hydrology. I'm doing public speaking right now, working with emergency coordinators. You're working with data all the time. And so the more that you know and the more skills you can acquire, the more you can do, really just the better off you'll be and the more marketable you'll be. And the last thing is that you're going to be able to do a lot of talking. I've come to learn that you can be the best forecaster in the world, but if you can't communicate that to all kinds of audiences, then it doesn't make a difference. So being able to get up on a whim and talk about a forecast or talk about what you know, talk about your job, it's a big deal because there's going to be a lot of opportunities to do it. So it's good to be prepared for it. So just a quick go over of kind of what's next for me. Where do I go from here? So I will actually be starting today my Master's of Applied Science in GIS, and that goes back to meteorology being a multifaceted field and not wanting to limit myself to one thing. So I have dabbled in GIS, but don't really have a deeper understanding of it. And so that's what I intend to do in the next year with this master's program. And then to add on to that, I am working on certification as a certified floodplain manager with the Association of State Floodplain Managers. And what that will do, what the intention of that is to certify me to have a better understanding of floodplains, how they come to be, how they can be changed, what specific floodplains mean, which is really big in that flood response planning and that preparation and knowing ahead of time on flooding, things like that. All right, that is all that I have. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, or I assume we'll do a Q&A real quick.
That was excellent, Hannah. Thank you so much. It looks like we do have a question if you'd like to answer it.
Okay,
What has
great.
been the biggest adjustment for you over the last year or two, transitioning from a student to a young professional?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. It's a really big transition, and honestly, I feel unrecognizable. I feel like than I was a year ago. But I would think the biggest thing is seeing yourself as a professional was the biggest transition for me. Being a student is, especially when you get into those junior and senior years, you do start to feel, kind of like a big dog, like you're starting to know what it is you're doing, what it is you're talking about. But moving into a professional field, you have to understand that you don't have, professors to rely on. And also, like, you have to, get yourself to work on time and respond to your emails on time. And that's really just the start of it. But applying yourself and applying what it is that you've learned and your degree into your work, I think was the biggest change.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your service to Maricopa County, the Flood Control District. We're really grateful to have you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, great. Thank you too. Thank you.